The first time Hazel Blackwood saw a man die, she was 7 years old. The fever had taken him quickly, his body burning up like kindling in a dry summer while the town whispered that her touch had cursed him. That was the beginning of her reputation in Thornridge, Colorado territory, 1876, the year folks started crossing the street when they saw her coming. The horse beneath her now was as broken as her spirit, a weathered mare nobody else would ride. Perfect company for a woman of 22 whom nobody would marry. Hazel nudged the animal forward along the dusty road leading away from her family's homestead, away from the hushed accusations after her youngest brother had fallen ill. They would blame her for that too, just as they had for every misfortune over the past 15 years. "You ain't coming back this time," she whispered, more to herself than the horse. Her saddlebags contained everything she owned: 2 dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, and enough food for 3 days. Enough to get her to Golden Creek, where nobody knew her name or the stories that followed it. The setting sun painted the mountains with fire as Hazel urged her mount forward. She'd left a note explaining she wouldn't burden her family any longer. They would pretend to search, but relief would settle over the Blackwood farm like a comfortable blanket once she was gone. Night fell quickly in the mountains, the temperature dropping as stars emerged overhead. Hazel had planned to ride through the darkness, but the mare was already wheezing with exertion. She would need to make camp at least for a few hours. She had just dismounted when she heard the distant rumble of hoofbeats, approaching fast. Bandits weren't uncommon in these parts, especially for a woman traveling alone. Hazel quickly led her horse into a dense grove of pines, praying the darkness would conceal them both. The rider came into view, a tall silhouette against the moonlit path. He was moving too fast for these treacherous mountain trails, his horse nearly stumbling on the loose rocks. Something was wrong. Even in the dim light, Hazel could see the man was slumped forward, barely holding onto the saddle horn. "Whoa there," a weak voice called as the horse slowed, seemingly of its own accord. The animal snorted, pawing at the ground nervously as the rider finally lost his grip and slid sideways. Hazel hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to let whatever trouble this man carried pass her by. But as he hit the ground with a sickening thud and lay motionless, something stronger than fear pushed her forward. "Mister?" She approached cautiously, one hand on the knife hidden in her skirts. "You all right?" He didn't move. Drawing closer, Hazel saw the dark stains spreading across his shirt. "Blood, fresh blood. Damn it all," she muttered, kneeling beside him. The man was young, perhaps a few years older than herself, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of beard. His breathing came in shallow gasps. "They got me good," he managed, eyes fluttering open. Even in pain, they were striking deep blue like the mountain lakes her father used to fish. "You'd best ride on, they might circle back." "Who might?" Hazel pressed a hand to his wound, feeling warm blood seep between her fingers. "Dugan's boys," he winced. "Stagecoach robbery went bad, I was trailing them. A lawman then, or a bounty hunter. Either way, he was moments from bleeding out on this lonely mountain trail. "I'm going to help you," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Can you stand?" He chuckled weakly. "Madam, I can't even feel my legs." Hazel glanced around frantically. She couldn't leave him, but she couldn't move him alone either. Her eyes fell on his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood nearby, still saddled. "What's your name?" she asked, tearing strips from her petticoat to fashion a temporary bandage. "Matthew." He coughed, specks of blood appearing on his lips. "Matthew Ryder. Well, Mr. Ryder, I'm Hazel Blackwood, and I'm not in the habit of watching men die when I can help it." She pressed the cloth against his wound. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe. You're wasting your time," he whispered, eyes drifting closed. "I'm already a dead man." "Not today you ain't," Hazel said firmly. With tremendous effort, she managed to drag him to a small clearing and build a fire. The bullet had gone clean through his side, missing vital organs but leaving him dangerously weak from blood loss. As she cleaned and bandaged the wound properly, Matthew drifted in and out of consciousness. In his lucid moments, his eyes followed her with a mixture of pain and curiosity. Where'd you learn to dress a wound like that? He asked as she tied off the bandage. My pa was a doctor before the drink took him, she replied, not meeting his gaze. Taught me a few things before he forgot everything himself. Lucky for me. His voice was stronger now. The bleeding finally stopped. Why are you out here alone, Miss Blackwood? Hazel busied herself with stoking the fire. Same reason as most folks heading west, looking for a fresh start, running from something. His perception was unnerving, aren't we all? She handed him a canteen. Drink, you lost a lot of blood. He took a small sip, wincing as he shifted position. I should warn you, those men might come back. If they find you helping me, then I'll deal with that when it happens. Hazel checked his forehead for fever. For now, you need rest. Morning came with a golden haze filtering through the pine branches. Hazel had dozed off against a tree trunk, her hand still resting on her knife. She awoke to find Matthew watching her, his color marginally better than the night before. You're still here, he observed. Where else would I be? She stretched, muscles protesting after the uncomfortable night. Most folks would have left a dying lawman to his fate. He attempted to sit up, grimacing with the effort. Hazel moved quickly to his side. Don't try to move yet. That bullet tore you up pretty bad. I need to get to Golden Creek, he said, jaw set with determination. Those men robbed the stage and killed 2 passengers. They'll be looking to cross into Utah territory before anyone catches up. Golden Creek. Hazel couldn't hide her surprise. That's where I'm headed. Matthew studied her face intently. Seems we're traveling the same direction then. I suppose we are, she hesitated, but you're in no condition to ride. I've ridden with worse, he insisted, though his pallor suggested otherwise, and probably nearly died from it too. Hazel shook her head. We'll stay here another day. By tomorrow, if infection doesn't set in, we can try for Golden Creek together. Matthew looked like he wanted to argue but lacked the strength. Instead, he sank back against the saddle she'd positioned behind him. You're an unusual woman, Miss Blackwood. So I've been told, she replied dryly. They passed the day with Matthew drifting in and out of sleep while Hazel tended the fire and kept watch. She changed his bandages twice, relieved to find the wound showing no signs of infection. By evening, he was able to sit up and take some jerky and hardtack from her provisions. You never did say why you're headed to Golden Creek, he said as night fell once more. Hazel stared into the fire. I told you, a fresh start. There are easier towns to start fresh in. Golden Creek's barely more than a mining camp with aspirations. Which makes it perfect for someone who doesn't want to be found, she replied. Matthew nodded slowly. I won't pry, but whatever you're running from it might catch up eventually. It usually does. Not this time. Hazel's voice hardened. Some things you can leave behind, like family, he guessed. The accuracy of his assumptions startled her. What makes you say that? The way you hesitate before mentioning your father, the fact you're traveling alone with no wedding ring. And that look in your eyes like you're carrying something heavy nobody can see. Hazel turned away, uncomfortable with his perception. You should rest. We have a long ride tomorrow. She felt his eyes on her back but refused to turn around. Finally, she heard him shift against the saddle with a soft groan. Thank you, he said quietly, for saving my life. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Ryder. We still have to get you to Golden Creek alive. The journey the next day was slow and painful. Matthew insisted on riding his own horse, though he could barely stay upright in the saddle. Hazel rode close beside him, ready to catch him should he start to fall. Tell me about these men we're after, she said, partly to keep him alert and partly out of genuine curiosity. 4 of them. Led by a man named Dugan, ex-Confederate who never accepted the war's end. Matthew adjusted his position with a wince. They've been hitting stagecoaches along the Denver route for months. This last one carried a gold shipment. And you're tracking them alone. Where's your posse? A grim smile crossed his face. I'm not exactly a sheriff, Miss Blackwood. A bounty hunter, then? Something like that. He squinted at the horizon. I work for the Rocky Mountain Detective Association, private outfit that handles what the law can't or won't. Hazel had heard of such men hired guns with badges no government issued. That seems a dangerous way to make a living. It pays better than farming. Matthew glanced at her. What about you? What will you do in Golden Creek? She'd been asking herself the same question. Fine work, I suppose. I can sew, cook, tend to the sick. A woman of many talents. A woman of necessity, she corrected. When you're known as cursed, you learn to be useful enough that folks tolerate you anyway. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Matthew turned in his saddle, wincing at the movement. Cursed, what does that mean? Hazel regretted her candor immediately. Nothing, just something foolish people say. About you, his eyes narrowed. Is that what you're running from, superstition? We should keep moving, she said, spurring her mare forward. We've got several hours before nightfall. They rode in silence for a while, the mountains gradually giving way to rolling foothills as they descended toward the valley where Golden Creek lay. By late afternoon, Matthew's strength was failing visibly. His face had gone ashen and he swayed dangerously in the saddle. We need to stop, Hazel announced, spotting a sheltered hollow beside a small stream. No, Matthew's voice was thin but determined. We're only a few hours out. I can make it. You'll die in the saddle, and then what good will you be to anyone? She dismounted and moved to help him down. One more night of rest. We'll reach town by midday tomorrow. Too weak to resist, Matthew allowed her to help him from the horse. His body burned with fever as she lowered him to the ground beneath a stand of cottonwoods. The wound's infected, she murmured, opening his shirt to find angry red streaks spreading from beneath the bandage. Just my luck, he said with a weak laugh. Survived the bullet only to die of fever. You're not dying. Hazel rummaged through her saddlebags. Not if I can help it. She found what she was looking for, a small leather pouch containing herbs her grandmother had taught her to gather. The old woman had been half Cherokee, passing down knowledge the white doctors scorned, but that had saved more than one life on the frontier. Hazel worked quickly, crushing yarrow leaves and mixing them with a pinch of willow bark. She cleaned the wound again, wincing at the heat radiating from it, then applied the poultice and rebandaged it tightly. Drink this, she said, offering Matthew a bitter-smelling tea brewed from the same herbs. He grimaced at the smell but took it without complaint. Where'd you learn about these medicines, my grandmother? Hazel dipped a cloth in cool water and placed it on his forehead. She knew things about healing that my father never did, though he was too proud to admit it. Is that why they called you cursed? Matthew asked quietly. Because of your grandmother's ways, Hazel stiffened. No, that came later. She busied herself with adjusting the blanket over him. You should try to sleep. But Matthew wasn't ready to let it go. What happened, Hazel? What did they blame you for? Perhaps it was the use of her given name or the genuine concern in his fever-bright eyes, but something compelled her to answer. When I was 7, I touched a man who died of fever the next day, just a handshake after church. She stared at her hands. Then my mother sickened after I helped her with the washing. She lived, but never fully recovered. After that, every misfortune that befell our town somehow traced back to me. Failed crops, stillborn calves, children who fell ill, they'd find some way I'd crossed paths with the afflicted. That's madness, Matthew said hoarsely. Is it? Hazel met his gaze. My brother took sick just 3 days ago, right after I mended his shirt. He was fine before that, then suddenly burning with fever. Her voice cracked. Maybe they're right, maybe I do bring misfortune. Look at me, Hazel Blackwood. Despite his weakness, Matthew's voice carried an authority that commanded her attention. I was gut shot and left for dead on that trail. By any measure, I should be in the ground right now. Instead, I'm sitting here talking to you because you didn't leave me to die. That doesn't sound like a curse to me. You're feverish now, she pointed out. The bullet did that, not you. His hand found hers, squeezing with surprising strength. People fear what they don't understand. They look for patterns to explain their suffering. You were just a convenient explanation. Hazel wanted desperately to believe him, but 15 years of accusation had carved doubt too deeply into her heart. Get some rest, Matthew. The herbs should bring your fever down by morning. She pulled her hand from his and moved to tend the horses, needing distance from the dangerous hope his words had kindled. That night, as Matthew slept fitfully beneath the stars, Hazel watched over him, changing the cool cloth on his forehead and occasionally checking his wound. By dawn, his fever had broken and he slept more peacefully. When he finally woke, his eyes were clear again. You're still here, he said, an echo of the previous morning. I told you I would be. She helped him sit up. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a buffalo, but I'll live." He managed a small smile. "Thanks to you." They ate a simple breakfast before breaking camp. Matthew moved stiffly but insisted on saddling his own horse, though Hazel noticed how he braced himself against the animal's flank when he thought she wasn't looking. The last few hours to Golden Creek passed in companionable silence. As they crested the final ridge, the town spread below them a collection of wooden buildings flanking a wide main street, with mines dotting the surrounding hillsides. "Not much to look at," Hazel observed. "But a good place to disappear," Matthew replied, "or to find a new beginning." They rode down the slope toward town, the horses picking their way carefully along the rutted trail. Just before they reached the outskirts, Matthew reined in his mount. "I should warn you," he said seriously. "When we reach town, I'll be looking for Dugan and his men. That could get dangerous. I'm aware of that. Maybe we should part ways here. You've done more than enough already." Hazel considered his offer. It would be sensible to distance herself from a man hunting dangerous criminals. But the thought of walking away now, of never knowing if he survived, twisted something in her chest. "I need to find lodgings anyway," she said, nudging her mare forward, "and you still need someone to change those bandages." The relief in Matthew's eyes was unmistakable, though he tried to hide it. "Just be careful, and if trouble starts, I'll run the other direction," she promised, though they both seemed to know it was a lie. Golden Creek welcomed them with the usual sounds of a mining town, the distant ring of pickaxes, piano music drifting from the saloon, the rattle of wagons on the dusty street. They drew curious glances as they rode down the main thoroughfare, a wounded man and a woman unaccompanied by husband or father. "We should find you a doctor," Hazel said, eyeing the blood that had seeped through Matthew's bandage during the ride. "Later. First, I need to check if Dugan's men have been through here." He nodded toward the sheriff's office. "Wait for me at the hotel. I'm not leaving you alone," she insisted. "You can barely stay in the saddle." Matthew looked like he wanted to argue, but simply nodded. They dismounted outside the sheriff's office, tying their horses to the hitching post. Hazel offered her arm for support, which Matthew accepted with obvious reluctance. The sheriff was a grizzled man with a gray mustache that drooped over thin lips. He looked up from his desk with irritation that quickly turned to surprise. "Ryder, thought you'd be halfway to Denver by now." "Change of plans, Sheriff Haynes." Matthew lowered himself carefully into a chair. "Dugan's boys ambushed me in the foothills. I've been tracking them toward Utah territory." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Hazel, then back to Matthew. "And who's this, Miss Hazel Blackwood? She saved my life." There was a warmth in Matthew's voice that caused the sheriff to raise an eyebrow. "Has there been any sign of Dugan or his gang?" "As a matter of fact, 3 strangers rode in yesterday, holed up at the Prospector's Rest." The sheriff leaned forward. "Only 3, though. Weren't there 4 in that gang? Dugan's likely dead," Matthew said grimly. "Took a bullet during the stagecoach robbery. I saw him fall, but his men dragged him away before I could confirm." "Well, these 3 are spending gold like it's going out of fashion." The sheriff eyed Matthew's blood-stained shirt. "You're in no condition for a confrontation, Ryder. I'll be fine. Just need a few hours rest." Hazel couldn't remain silent any longer. He needs a doctor and at least a day's bed rest before he goes chasing after anyone. Both men turned to her with identical expressions of surprise, as if they'd forgotten she was there. "The lady's right," Sheriff Haynes said. "Doc Miller's office is down the street. I'll keep an eye on our visitors until you're back on your feet." Matthew didn't look happy about the delay, but he nodded reluctantly. "First sign of them making a move to leave town, you send word immediately." "I will." "Now get yourself patched up proper before you bleed all over my office." Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Hazel helped Matthew back to his horse, noting how he leaned more heavily against her than before. "You don't have to stay," he said as they made their way toward the doctor's office. "You've done more than enough already." "Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. Ryder?" A smile tugged at his lips despite the pain. "Just giving you the chance to start that new life without a wounded lawman complicating matters." "I think I can manage both," she replied, at least until you're well enough to chase outlaws on your own." The doctor confirmed what Hazel already knew: the wound was healing, but had been dangerously close to a fatal infection. He prescribed rest and clean bandages, giving Matthew a stern look when he mentioned going after Dugan's men. "That bullet missed your liver by less than an inch," Doc Miller said. "You start gallivanting around too soon, and the next one might not be so considerate." They found rooms at the Golden Creek Hotel, a 2-story building that was the most respectable establishment in town. The proprietress, Mrs. Whitman, was a plump woman with shrewd eyes who took in their disheveled appearance with obvious suspicion. "We don't rent rooms to unmarried couples," she announced, arms folded across her ample bosom. "We require separate rooms, madam," Hazel said quickly. "Mr. Ryder is recovering from an injury, and I am his nurse." Mrs. Whitman's eyes narrowed. "Is that so, and what's your relationship otherwise?" Before Hazel could answer, Matthew stepped forward. "Miss Blackwood is my fiancée," he said smoothly. "We were traveling to meet her family in Sacramento when we were set upon by bandits. She's been tending my wounds since, and we would be most grateful for your discretion and hospitality." The lie was delivered with such conviction that even Hazel almost believed it. Mrs. Whitman's expression softened marginally. "Well, in that case, I suppose I can offer you adjacent rooms, but I'll have no impropriety in my establishment." She gave them both a warning look as she handed over the keys. Once they were alone in the hallway, Hazel raised an eyebrow at Matthew. "Fiancé?" He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "It seemed the simplest explanation. I apologize if I overstepped." "It's fine," she said, though the words stirred something unexpected in her chest. "Get some rest. I'll bring you dinner later." Matthew caught her hand before she could turn away. "Hazel, thank you for everything." His palm was warm against hers, his blue eyes sincere in a way that made her breath catch. "You're welcome," she managed, gently withdrawing her hand. "Now rest." Alone in her room, the first private accommodation she'd had in days, Hazel took stock of her situation. Her plan to disappear into a new life had been thoroughly derailed by a wounded lawman and his mission. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret helping Matthew. For the first time in years, someone looked at her without fear or suspicion, saw her as a blessing rather than a curse. After washing away the dust of their journey and changing into her cleanest dress, Hazel ventured downstairs to the hotel dining room. She ordered meals for both herself and Matthew, ignoring the curious glances from other diners. As she waited, she overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables. 3 of them drinking like there's no tomorrow at the Prospectors. Heard they might be the same gang that hit the Denver stage, offering good money for help with a business opportunity heading west. Hazel's attention sharpened. These had to be Dugan's men, already recruiting for whatever they planned next. She needed to tell Matthew, though she doubted he would wait until fully healed before confronting them. When she returned to Matthew's room with a tray of food, she found him sitting by the window, cleaning his revolver. His shirt was off, fresh bandages wrapped around his torso, and Hazel couldn't help noticing the lean muscle of his shoulders despite the angry red wound at his side. "You should be in bed," she admonished, setting down the tray. "I've rested enough." He reassembled the gun with practiced movements. "Sheriff Haynes sent word. Dugan's men are planning to leave tomorrow morning. I need to be ready." "You heard about their recruitment efforts," Matthew nodded grimly. "They're looking for extra guns for whatever they're planning next." He looked up at her. "How did you know about that?" Overheard it in the dining room. Hazel uncovered the plates of stew and biscuits. "You need to eat before you do anything else." To her surprise, he didn't argue, setting aside the gun and moving stiffly to the small table where she'd placed the food. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Matthew spoke again. "I want you to stay here tomorrow. Lock your door and don't come out until I return." "And if you don't return?" The possibility squeezed her heart more painfully than she'd expected. "Then find that new beginning you came here for." His eyes met hers across the table. "Promise me, Hazel." She wanted to refuse, to insist on helping him somehow, but the intensity of his gaze stopped her. "I promise to stay out of the way," she said carefully, but I won't promise to do nothing if you're in trouble." Matthew sighed, recognizing the compromise for what it was. Fair enough. "Just be careful. These men won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets between them and freedom." As twilight deepened outside the window, they finished their meal in companionable silence. Hazel found herself studying Matthew's face, the straight line of his nose, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward. In just a few days, he had become important to her in a way no one had been for a very long time. "Tell me something," she said suddenly. "How did you become a detective? It seems an unusual choice." Matthew sat back, wincing slightly at the movement. "My father was a sheriff in Missouri. He was killed trying to stop a bank robbery when I was 16. His voice was steady, but Hazel could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I wanted justice, but the law moved too slowly. The Rocky Mountain Detective Association offered a way to track down men the regular law couldn't touch, and have you found it? Justice? Sometimes." He looked down at his hands. "Other times I wonder if I'm just adding more violence to a violent world, yet you keep doing it. Someone has to." His eyes found hers again. "What about you? What would you have done if you hadn't found me bleeding on that trail?" Hazel considered the question. "Kept riding, I suppose, found work somewhere nobody knew me, lived quietly. Alone," the word hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "It seemed the safest choice," she admitted. "For everyone." Matthew reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Not everyone believes in curses, Hazel Blackwood." The touch sent warmth spiraling through her, dangerous and tempting. "Maybe they should," she whispered, withdrawing her hand. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow will come early enough." She stood, gathering the dishes onto the tray. Matthew rose as well, moving around the table until he stood directly before her. "Hazel." Just her name, spoken softly in the dim light of the oil lamp. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how the air between them seemed charged with something neither had dared name. "Be careful tomorrow," she said, her voice barely audible. "I will." His hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch feather light. "For your sake, if nothing else." For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Part of her wanted him to, desperately. But he stepped back, the moment passing like smoke in a breeze. "Good night, Matthew," she managed, retreating to the door. "Good night, Hazel." In her own room, Hazel lay awake long into the night, listening to the occasional footsteps in the hallway and the distant piano from the saloon. She thought of Matthew preparing to confront dangerous men while still wounded, of the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, of the warmth of his touch that lingered on her skin. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through thin curtains. Hazel dressed quickly, choosing her sturdiest skirt and boots despite her promise to stay out of harm's way. A knock at her door revealed Matthew, fully dressed with his gun belt secured around his hips. He looked pale but determined. "Sheriff Haynes sent word. Dugan's men are saddling up now." His eyes took in her practical attire with a frown. "Remember your promise." "I remember." She stepped closer, straightening the collar of his shirt with steady hands. "But you remember this, you're not fully healed. Don't take unnecessary risks." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." Impulsively, Hazel reached up and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. Something flared in Matthew's eyes, and for a moment his hand tightened on hers. Then he nodded once and turned away, striding down the hallway without looking back. Hazel watched him go, a cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She waited until his footsteps faded before slipping out of her room and making her way downstairs. She wouldn't interfere, but she couldn't simply sit and wait either. The main street was relatively quiet for early morning, with only a few merchants opening their shops and miners heading toward the hills. Hazel positioned herself on the boardwalk outside the general store, which offered a clear view of both the Prospector's Rest Saloon and the sheriff's office. She didn't have to wait long. 3 men emerged from the saloon, leading horses already packed for travel. Even from a distance, Hazel could tell these were dangerous men, hard-faced and watchful, hands never straying far from their weapons. Matthew appeared at the far end of the street, walking steadily toward them. Sheriff Haynes stood outside his office, shotgun in hand but making no move to approach. This was Matthew's fight and everyone knew it. Jennings, Carter, Walsh. Matthew's voice carried clearly in the morning air. You're wanted for the robbery of the Denver stage and the murder of 2 passengers. The 3 men froze, then slowly turned to face him. The tallest, a man with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat, spoke first. Well, if it ain't the detective who can't seem to die proper. He spat into the dust. Thought we left you bleeding out in the mountains. It'll take more than 1 bullet to stop me, Matthew replied, his stance deceptively casual though Hazel could see the tension in his shoulders. Where's Dugan? Feeding the worms, said another of the men, shorter but broader, with a cruel twist to his mouth. That'd be Walsh. Same place you'll be once we finish what we started. Townspeople were scattering now, ducking into doorways or retreating down side streets. Hazel remained frozen in place, heart hammering against her ribs. You have 2 choices, Matthew announced. Surrender now and face trial, or resist and face judgment much sooner. The red-haired man Jennings, Hazel presumed, laughed harshly. 3 against 1 lawman. And from the look of you, you're barely standing as it is. 3 against 2, Sheriff Haynes called, stepping forward with his shotgun raised. And I've wired for marshals from Denver. They'll be here by sundown. A tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous whicker of horses and the creak of leather as hands hovered near weapons. Hazel held her breath, eyes fixed on Matthew's still form. The 3rd outlaw, Carter, made the first move, his hand darting toward his holster. But Matthew was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion despite his injury. Carter stumbled backward, clutching his arm as his gun fell to the dust. Everything happened at once after that. Walsh and Jennings drew their weapons, shots exploding in the quiet morning. Matthew dove to the side, returning fire as he rolled behind a water trough. Sheriff Haynes fired his shotgun, the blast deafening as it tore splinters from the hitching post where Jennings had taken cover. Hazel pressed herself against the store front, heart in her throat as bullets whizzed past. Through the chaos, she saw Matthew rise to one knee, firing steadily at Walsh, who had taken position behind a wagon. The outlaw crumpled suddenly, Matthew's bullet finding its mark, but Jennings had circled around, using the confusion to gain a better angle. Hazel saw him raise his gun, aiming directly at Matthew's unprotected back. Without thinking, she seized a heavy shovel propped against the general store's wall and rushed forward. Matthew, behind you! Both men turned at her cry. Matthew tried to swing around, but he was too slow, hampered by his wound. Jennings grinned savagely, finger tightening on the trigger. Hazel swung the shovel with all her strength, the metal edge connecting with Jennings' arm just as he fired. The bullet went wide, burying itself in the boardwalk as the outlaw howled in pain. Matthew recovered instantly, lunging forward to deliver a crushing blow to Jennings' jaw with the butt of his revolver. The outlaw collapsed in a heap, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Silence fell over the street, broken only by the groans of the wounded outlaws and the ringing in Hazel's ears from the gunfire. She stood frozen, the shovel still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Matthew stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, holstering his gun, he crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You promised to stay out of the way," he said, his voice tight with what might have been anger or fear or something else entirely. "I promised not to interfere unless you were in trouble," she corrected, still gripping the shovel. "You were about to get shot in the back. I call that trouble." For a moment, she thought he might scold her further. Instead, he pulled her against him, arms wrapping around her with surprising strength for a wounded man. "You could have been killed," he murmured into her hair. "So could you?" Her voice was muffled against his chest, where she could feel his heart pounding as rapidly as her own. Sheriff Haynes approached, eyeing the embracing pair with raised eyebrows before turning his attention to the downed outlaws. "Well, that's that. Jennings and Walsh alive." Matthew reluctantly released Hazel, though he kept one hand at the small of her back. Walsh took one in the chest. "Don't think he'll make it. Jennings and Carter should live to hang." "Good enough." The sheriff nodded toward Hazel. Quite a swing you've got there, miss. Saved our detective some serious trouble. Just happened to be in the right place, she said, finally letting the shovel drop from her trembling hands. Happened to ignore a direct request to stay safe, you mean, Matthew muttered, though there was no real anger in his voice. Well, whatever the case, it's over now. Sheriff Haynes waved over several townsmen who had emerged from hiding. Help me get these three to the jail. Lady, you might want to see to your man there, he's bleeding again. Hazel looked at Matthew in alarm, noticing for the first time the fresh blood staining his shirt. You've torn your stitches. Worth it, he said grimly, watching as the unconscious Jennings was hauled away. They killed innocent people, Hazel. This was justice, at least. Justice won't matter much if you bleed to death in the street, she chided, slipping an arm around his waist. Let's get you back to Doc Miller. The town gradually returned to normal as they made their way to the doctor's office, though people stopped to stare at the pair, the wounded detective and the woman who had faced down a killer with nothing but a shovel. Doc Miller was less than pleased to see his patient return with reopened wounds. What did I tell you about gallivanting around? He grumbled, cutting away the blood-soaked bandages. Lucky it's just torn stitches and not a new bullet hole. As the doctor worked, Matthew's eyes never left Hazel's face. That was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said softly. I couldn't just watch you die, she replied simply. No, I suppose you couldn't. A small smile touched his lips. Just as I couldn't leave you alone once this is over, her heart stuttered at his words. What do you mean? I mean that I've spent 3 days with you, Hazel Blackwood, and I already know I don't want to spend another day without you. Doc Miller cleared his throat loudly. Perhaps this conversation could wait until I'm not elbow-deep in your insides, Ryder. Matthew ignored him, his gaze intent on Hazel's face. I know it's sudden. I know we barely know each other, but sometimes life gives you a chance you'd be a fool to ignore. Matthew. Hazel whispered, unsure what to say, how to explain all the reasons his words both thrilled and terrified her. You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Just think about it, about us. Doc Miller snorted as he tied off the final stitch. If you two are quite finished, I'd like my patient to actually rest this time. Miss, can I trust you to make sure he stays in bed for at least 24 hours? Hazel nodded, grateful for the interruption that gave her time to collect her scattered thoughts. I'll see to it, doctor. Good. Because if he tears these stitches again, I'm just going to let him bleed. The walk back to the hotel passed in charged silence, both of them acutely aware of Matthew's declaration hanging between them. In his room, Hazel helped him to the bed, careful not to disturb the fresh bandages. I should let you rest, she said, turning to leave. Hazel. His hand caught hers. I meant what I said. She looked down at their joined hands. Matthew, you don't know what you're saying. You don't know me, not really. I know enough. He tugged gently until she sat on the edge of the bed. I know you're brave and kind. I know you saved my life not once but twice. I know you ran from people who feared you for no reason, and I know you deserve better than that. And what about you? She challenged. You chase dangerous men for a living. You nearly died 3 days ago and almost got shot again today. What kind of life would that be? A life I'd share with you, he said simply. If you wanted it. The sincerity in his voice shook her. For 15 years, she'd lived with whispers and accusations, with people crossing the street to avoid her shadow. And here was this man offering her not just acceptance, but something she'd never dared hope for. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, but of what might happen. The people in my town weren't wrong about everything. Misfortune does seem to follow me. Hazel, look at me. He waited until she met his gaze. When you found me, I was minutes from death. Now I'm alive, those outlaws are captured, and justice will be served for the people they killed. If that's your curse, I'll happily live under it for the rest of my days. A tear slipped down her cheek. You can't know that nothing bad will happen. No one can. He reached up to brush the tear away. But I know I'd rather face whatever comes with you than without you. Hazel closed her eyes, letting his words sink into the wounded places in her heart. My family would say you're a fool. Your family was wrong about you, he said firmly. And I'm only a fool if I let you walk away without telling you how I feel. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. "And how do you feel, Matthew Ryder? Like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Like maybe we both found exactly what we needed on that mountain trail." The wall she'd built around her heart over 15 years of rejection began to crumble. "I need time," she whispered. "This is all happening so fast. We have time." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere for at least a day, doctor's orders." A small laugh escaped her, easing the tension between them. "And after that, I need to report to the Denver office about Dugan's gang." His eyes held hers. "I'd like it very much if you came with me. To Denver." "To Denver, and then wherever else life takes us." Matthew's expression grew serious. "I won't pressure you, Hazel, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, I don't believe you're cursed. I believe you're the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Hazel felt something shift inside her, hope taking root where fear had dwelled for so long. "Rest now," she said, rising from the bed. "We can talk more when you're stronger." Matthew nodded, though reluctance showed in his eyes. "Will you at least stay in Golden Creek until I'm well enough to travel? Give us that much time." "I'll stay," she promised. "I need to find work anyway." "About that." A smile touched his lips. "Sheriff Haynes mentioned the town's been looking for someone with medical knowledge. Their last doctor's assistant left for California with your experience." Hazel raised an eyebrow. "You've been making plans for me already." "Just noting opportunities," he said innocently. "It would mean you'd have a place here if Denver doesn't appeal to you." The thought was tempting, a position where her knowledge would be valued rather than feared. A town where she might build a new reputation based on healing rather than hurting. "I'll think about it," she said. "All of it. That's all I ask." Matthew's eyes were already growing heavy with exhaustion and the doctor's laudanum. "Stay with me until I fall asleep," she nodded, settling into the chair beside his bed. As his breathing deepened, Hazel studied his face, now relaxed in sleep. 3 days ago, she'd been fleeing a life of whispers and fear. Now she was considering a future with a man who looked at her and saw not a curse but a blessing. Perhaps, she thought as she watched Matthew sleep, they had both been saved on that mountain trail. The next week passed in a blur of new experiences for Hazel. True to Matthew's suggestion, she inquired about the position at Doc Miller's office and was hired almost immediately when the doctor discovered the extent of her knowledge about both traditional and herbal medicine. "Where'd you learn about using yarrow for infection?" he asked after watching her treat a miner's festering hand wound. "That's old Indian knowledge, my grandmother," Hazel explained, wrapping the clean bandage with practiced efficiency. "She was half Cherokee." The doctor nodded approvingly. "Well, it works better than half the tinctures they send from back east. You're hired, Miss Blackwood. $8 a week and room and board if you need it." The offer stunned her. It was more money than she'd ever earned and a position of respect in the community rather than fear. She accepted immediately, though she kept her room at the hotel for now, unwilling to commit to permanence until she'd sorted through her feelings about Matthew and his proposal. For his part, Matthew recovered quickly once he actually followed the doctor's orders to rest. By the end of the week, he was able to walk comfortably around town, though Doc Miller still forbade him from riding or any strenuous activity. They spent their evenings together, sharing meals and conversation, learning each other's stories. Matthew told her about growing up in Missouri, about his mother who still wrote him letters begging him to find a safer profession, about cases he'd solved and the occasional ones that still haunted him. In turn, Hazel shared memories of her childhood before the accusations began, helping her father in his practice, learning plant lore from her grandmother, the simple joys of a life uncomplicated by fear and suspicion. She spoke of her brothers and sisters, of the pain when they too began to keep their distance. "Do you miss them?" Matthew asked one evening as they sat on the hotel's small veranda, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "Parts of them," she admitted. "The way they were before the fear took root. My youngest brother, Jacob, he was born after people started calling me cursed. He never knew me any other way." Matthew's hand found hers, a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar. You could write to them, let them know you're safe. Perhaps. Someday. She wasn't ready yet to bridge that gulf, to risk rejection once more. As Matthew's strength returned, their conversations inevitably turned to the future. The Denver office had wired congratulations on capturing Dugan's men and requested his return to report in person. "I'll be leaving in 3 days," he told her over dinner in the hotel's small dining room. "The stage runs twice weekly to Denver." Hazel nodded, her stomach tightening at the thought of his departure. "Doc Miller says I'm proving quite valuable. He's already talking about teaching me more advanced procedures." "You could do well here," Matthew agreed, his eyes steady on her face. "Golden Creek would be lucky to have you." The unspoken question hung between them. Denver or Golden Creek, a life with him or a life of her own making. Both options offered freedom from her past, but in very different ways. "I still don't know what to do," she confessed. "Part of me wants to go with you, another part is afraid of what that means." "What are you afraid of, Hazel?" His voice was gentle, free of judgment. She struggled to articulate the fear that still lingered despite everything. "That someday you'll look at me and see what everyone else saw, that someday misfortune will strike, and you'll wonder if they were right about me all along." Matthew was silent for a long moment, considering her words. Then he reached into his pocket and placed something on the table between them, a simple gold band. "I bought this today," he said quietly, "not to pressure you but to show you how certain I am." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I don't believe in curses, Hazel. I believe in choices. And I choose you whatever comes." Hazel stared at the ring, her heart thundering in her chest. "Matthew, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Take the 3 days. Think about what you want, not what you fear. The ring will be here and so will I until you decide." She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. The ring gleamed in the lamplight, a promise and a challenge both. That night, alone in her room, Hazel sat by the window, staring at the stars scattered across the mountain sky. She thought of the path that had led her here, the years of isolation, the desperate flight from home, the wounded man she'd found on the trail. If she hadn't left when she did, if she'd chosen a different route, if she'd hidden when she heard the approaching Ryder. So many chances, so many choices that had brought her to this moment of decision. In the morning, she rose early and went to the telegraph office. After a moment's hesitation, she sent a brief message to her family. "I am safe and well in Golden Creek, have found work as a doctor's assistant." Hazel, it wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement. A statement that she existed beyond their fear, that she had found a place where her skills were valued. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of work at the doctor's office. A mining accident brought in several injured men, keeping her busy from dawn until well after dusk. She saw Matthew only briefly, their conversations limited to quick exchanges as she rushed between patients. On the morning of his departure, Hazel woke before sunrise. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Matthew had once said matched her eyes. Then she packed her few belongings into her saddlebags and went to settle her account with Mrs. Whitman. The stagecoach was scheduled to leave at 8 o'clock. At 7:30, Hazel walked to Matthew's room and knocked softly. He opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting, his own bags packed and ready beside him. "Hazel," just her name, but the hope in his voice was unmistakable. She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said." "About choices?" He nodded, waiting patiently for her to continue. "My whole life, other people's choices defined me. They chose to fear me, to blame me, to see only the worst possibilities." She stepped closer to him. "But you chose differently. From the moment we met, you chose to trust me, to see me as something other than a curse." "Because that's what you are," he said softly. "Something other, something more." "I want to choose too," she whispered. "I want to choose a life where I'm not running or hiding. Where I can be who I am without fear." Matthew's eyes never left her face. "And what life is that, Hazel Blackwood?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out the gold ring he had offered her 2 nights before. "A life with you, if you still want it." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise in the mountains, gradual, then brilliant, illuminating everything it touched. He took the ring from her palm, then gently lifted her left hand. "I have wanted it since you found me on that trail," he said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "And I will want it every day for the rest of my life." The metal was cool against her skin, but it quickly warmed, a tangible symbol of the choice she had made, not out of fear or desperation, but out of hope and the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. "The stage leaves in 30 minutes, she said, gesturing to her packed bags in the hallway. "I hope there's room for one more passenger to Denver," Matthew laughed, a sound of pure joy that erased the last of her doubts. "There's always room for you, Hazel. Wherever I go, there will always be room for you." He pulled her into his arms then, his kiss a promise more binding than any ring. Hazel melted against him, 15 years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally separated, Matthew pressed his forehead to hers. "Your family called you a curse," he murmured, "but I call you mine, and I'm never letting go." "I'm counting on that," she whispered back, her heart lighter than it had been since childhood. "I'm counting on that for the rest of our lives." Hand in hand, they gathered their belongings and walked together into the morning sunlight, toward the waiting stagecoach and the future they had chosen together. 5 years later, Hazel Ryder stood on the porch of their Denver home, watching as her husband dismounted from his horse with their 3-year-old daughter perched securely in front of him. Little Sarah squealed with delight as Matthew swung her down, her dark curls bouncing around a face that was the perfect blend of her parents' features. "Mama," she cried, running across the yard with arms outstretched. "Papa took me to see the new horses." Hazel scooped up her daughter, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "Did he now, and were they beautiful horses?" "The most beautiful," Sarah declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Papa says I can have one when I'm bigger." "Does he indeed?" Hazel raised an eyebrow at her husband, who approached with a slightly sheepish grin. "And did Papa consult with Mama about this decision?" "Papa was planning to surprise Mama with the news over dinner," Matthew said, leaning in to kiss his wife's cheek. Along with the news that his request for reassignment was approved, Hazel's eyes widened. "Truly no more dangerous field work," he nodded, taking Sarah from her arms. "Training position at the Denver office, regular hours, home for dinner every night. No more tracking outlaws across 3 territories." "Just like you promised," she whispered, joy spreading through her chest. When they'd married 5 years ago, Matthew had sworn that once they had children, he would find a safer position within the agency. Hazel had never pressed the issue, knowing how much his work meant to him, but she'd lived with the constant fear that one day he wouldn't return from a mission. "I keep my promises, Mrs. Ryder." His free arms slipped around her waist. "Always have, always will." Their life together hadn't been without challenges. Matthew had been wounded twice more in the line of duty, though never as seriously as that first time. They'd weathered the loss of their first pregnancy, the death of Hazel's father without reconciliation, and the skepticism of those who thought their whirlwind courtship wouldn't last. But through it all, Matthew had never once looked at her with doubt or fear. When misfortune struck, he faced it with the same courage and determination that had first drawn her to him. And when joy came as it had with Sarah's birth and again with the new life now growing beneath Hazel's heart, he embraced it fully, without reservation. "I have news too," she said as they walked together into the house. "Doc Wilson says the practice is doing so well they want to make me a full partner." Matthew's face lit up with pride. "Hazel, that's wonderful, the first female doctor's partner in Denver." "Possibly in all of Colorado territory," she confirmed, unable to contain her smile. After years of assisting and studying, she had finally achieved what once seemed impossible recognition for her healing skills without fear or superstition. Later that evening, with Sarah tucked into bed upstairs, they sat together on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared one by one above the distant mountains. Matthew's arm was warm around her shoulders, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly where their second child grew. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "That day on the trail. How different our lives might have been if you hadn't stopped to help a bleeding stranger." Hazel leaned her head against his shoulder. Sometimes, but then I remember what you told me once about choices. I chose to stop, you chose to trust me, and every day since, we've chosen each other. Best choice I ever made, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Even with all the trouble that's followed us, she teased, though the old fear had long since lost its power. Matthew chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. Especially with all the trouble. It makes the good parts that much sweeter. Hazel turned in his arms to face him, taking in the beloved features that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The years had added a few lines around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but his gaze still held the same warmth that had first given her courage to trust again. Your family called you a curse, he said softly, echoing words he had spoken on the day they left Golden Creek together. But I called you mine, and I've never let go. And you never will, she finished, the words both a statement and a promise. As his lips met hers in the gathering darkness, Hazel Ryder thought of the long, winding trail that had led her here, not to an escape from her past, but to a future brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. A future built on choice and trust and love that had never wavered, not even in the darkest moments. Her family had called her a curse, but Matthew had seen the truth from the beginning. And in his eyes, in his arms, in the life they had built together, Hazel had finally found what she had sought all along, not just acceptance, but belonging. Not just safety, but home, a home that would never let her go.